Pokémon mechanics have changed a lot over the course of the franchise. What started with sketchy coding and relatively simple battle mechanics has spawned a 3-decade-long competitive gaming monster that seems to grow every year in size and complexity. Each generation of games has its own metagame based on that individual game's mechanical quirks and oddities. In my last video, I discussed how one of Pokemon's biggest mechanical changes has affected some types deeply, while others were mostly left alone. Today, I'm talking about a similar but I think smaller change that has for a handful of Pokemon shaped their use in the metagame ever since. It's the special split of Generation 2. For those unaware, and I was in this camp for a very long time despite having played Pokemon for most of my life, in Generation 1, you didn't have special attack and special defense, you just had special, and it was used for both. If you had a high special stat, you were both bulky and offensively threatening. This statistical quirk was changed in Generation 2 when they separated the defensive and offensive special stats out, so that you could have a Pokemon that was specially bulky but not necessarily strong as an attacker as well, and vice versa. Really, it was just an options and balance thing. Pokemon in Generation 1 had to have one for both, so if the developers wanted something to be specially bulky, they were forced to have it be a monster attacker as well. Not great for flexibility or balance, so the change was made. Ultimately a good change, I think. The game would probably be a lot less interesting without it. Obviously, this didn't affect Generation 2 Pokemon, which were all created with both special stats in mind, but Generation 1's Pokemon were affected. Game Freak had to decide what their new stats would be, which would fundamentally affect how good they were. Game Freak, as far as I can tell by comparing the stats, did this in a bespoke way for each Pokemon, which is good. It means that they looked at each of them and made a decision about what the appropriate stat would be, rather than just duplicating the special stat for each Pokemon en masse. In some cases where it really probably doesn't matter too much, they did duplicate them. For example, Bulbasaur's special stat in Generation 1 was 65, and both its special attack and special defense now are, you guessed it, 65. Bulbasaur really isn't used beyond the beginning of the game before it evolves, and few people probably choose to use it as a Bulbasaur throughout the game, so that feels like a fair enough approach. By contrast, we can see that they actively decided to make a change for the Charmander line, so that it wouldn't be super specially bulky. Charmander's special stat was 50 in Generation 1, and in Generation 2 it had 60 special attack and 50 special defense. In reassigning the special stats, some Pokemon inevitably benefited more than others. Some Pokemon received substantial nerfs and buffs as a result of this change, which is what I would like to talk about today. I'll talk through some specific changes, a bit of best and worst in each case, and then speak more generally about the trends that I can see. I started initially by asking how the addition of an entirely new stat affected base stat totals. Yes, they would go up of course, but by how much? And who received the biggest increases? For the most part, it was Pokemon with a high special stat in Generation 1 receiving both high special stats in Generation 2, such as Jynx, Porygon, and Mr. Mime. Or Pokemon with absolutely awful special stats in Generation 1 receiving strong special defense in Generation 2, such as Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee. These Pokemon were the biggest beneficiaries from the split, looking at the data this way. Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee were so specially frail in Generation 1, making them even more vulnerable to the already overpowered Psychic types. They're still absolutely no match for a Psychic from Alakazam, but they might survive a confusion from a lesser Psychic type. Those that already had strong special stats and received buffs were now even stronger for whatever reason. In some cases, they didn't just receive duplicated stats, they got actively buffed in one or the other. Porygon had 75 special in Generation 1, which isn't spectacular or anything, but in Generation 2 got 75 special defense and 85 special attack, rather than 75 for each. Mr. Mime, which was already jacked in Generation 1, received the single largest base stat total increase as a result of the split, as a percentage and in raw terms. In Generation 1, Mr. Mime had a special stat of 100, tied for 9th equal, but in Generation 2, it retained 100 special attack and got 120 special defense, making it even more of a special wall. The Pokemon which received the smallest increases to base stat total as a result of the split were either low base stat total Pokemon to begin with, or Pokemon which had nothing going on in the special department anyway. Sandshrew and Magikarp are right at the bottom here, both of course renowned as vicious special attackers. Pokemon which are otherwise good but got nothing out of the split include Chansey, which retained its 105 special defense but got a measly 35 special attack. Tauros, Generation 1's heavy-hitting normal machine, maintained 70 special defense from its 70 special in Generation 1, but only managed 40 special attack, which is fine. Tauros can focus on its other strengths. While numbers are important to understanding how Pokemon works, they don't give us the full picture of the gameplay, and don't account for move access, typing, and so forth. So the real question is, who benefited most from the split overall, and who suffered the most? I must admit, I had a very strong prior assumption before I looked into this, and it was a large part of my reason for making this video. I thought it was Gyarados. Let me explain why. In Generation 1, Gyarados is a monster stat-wise, ranking at 7th equal for base stat total. Let me point out that that's 7th equal behind Mewtwo, Mew, Dragonite, Moltres, Articuno, and Zapdos. It is in the elite stat group for the original 151. Its stats are well balanced, with defense being the lowest at 79, which is hardly terrible. It's not what I would call fast at 81 speed, but its 95 HP and massive offensive 125 attack and 100 special make it absolutely lethal if it does attack. It wasn't totally overpowered. A Thunderbolt from an OK special attacker would usually finish it off, but its HP and its special stat mean that anything less was unlikely to kill it, and withstanding a hit is not an easy ask. It got access to an unbelievable set of moves in Generation 1, such as Hydro Pump, Hyper Beam, Ice Beam, Blizzard, Thunder and Thunderbolt, and Fire Blast. It doesn't feature a lot in the Red, Blue, Yellow metagame due to the particular quirks and strategies of that meta, but in casual play it is a menace to society. Today, we wouldn't really associate Gyarados with using many of the special moves I listed above very well at all, because it has a completely lackluster special attack stat of 60, and thus non-stab special moves are really a non-starter. This was Gyarados' downfall in Generation 2. Its special stat was converted to special defense, and it was nerfed by receiving only 60 special attack, not the functional 100 special attack it used to terrorize with. The worst part is that it couldn't really use its stab moves effectively at all. Sure, it can be tutored Bounce in Generation 4, but it doesn't naturally learn any physical flying moves, and as I previously discussed, Water is a mostly special attacking type. In Generations 2 and 3, Gyarados was there, red as the sun, but it was a shadow of the former menacing mixed attacker of its origin. The other losers fall into two categories. Pokemon who had a great special stat in Generation 1, but couldn't cut it later on without having both good special attack and special defense. Those who retained great special defense but lacked their previous offensive vigor included Hypno, Ninetales, and Tentacruel. These Pokemon were converted to special walls, losing their abilities to deal copious amounts of special damage. Hypno had 115 special, but in Generation 2 has just 73 special attack. Ninetales was great in Generation 1 with 100 special, but ended up with 81 special attack in Generation 2, which is still not bad by any stretch. And while Tentacruel lost its 120 special stat in Generation 1 to just 80 special attack in Generation 2, it has carved out enough of a niche as a special wall that I don't think it matters too much. In most cases, these were reasonable enough balance changes. It's just that they were significant downgrades from what was an unbalanced way to allocate stats in Generation 1. Funnily enough, the losers on the other end were mostly very strong grass types in Generation 1. Exeggutor, Gen 1's meta status king, was specially excellent with its 125 special, which was hard nerfed to 65 special defense in Generation 2. Grass Psychic is a bad enough type combo as it is, but with defenses of 85 and 65, it's almost unbearable. Fire and Ice are now total threats. Omastar is in a similar camp, going from 115 special to 75 special defense, significantly weakening it to 4 times effective grass moves. Victory Bell also lost out in a similar way. I actually think that the biggest loser in this category is kind of deserved, and that's Tangela. It's not that I dislike Tangela, I think it's a fun, goofy looking mess of tentacles, but it was way too strong in Generation 1. It had absolutely no business having 100 special and 115 defense. Seriously, it's 7th highest defense in Generation 1. It's a grass type single stage. So when it had its special defense cut to 40 and maintained 100 special attack, that felt appropriate. There is also a middle ground of Pokemon who received what I would call reasonable stats. Their special stat was converted into either just okay special attack or defense. Alakazam is in this camp. It's meant to be the strong psychic type, so it retains 130 special attack, but has a reasonable special defense of 85 and still has its total glass cannon physical defense and HP. Gengar is in almost exactly the same camp, just a touch bulkier and slower. As for the winners, there are a few candidates, but I can't think of any single Pokemon who gained more than Snorlax. Now, I'm a little biased because I almost consider Snorlax to be a perfect Pokemon, but honestly, this thing gained so much from the split. Snorlax had a terrible special stat in Generation 1 at 65, which severely limited its ability to be fat and absorb damage indiscriminately. It was still a good Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but it's not Generation 2 Snorlax. This thing received the buff to end all buffs, which made it the hegemonic Pokemon of the Generation 2 meta. I know relatively little about competitive Pokemon generally, and less about Gen 2, but I know that it's a complex and long-winded style of playing, compared by some to a chess match. And no Pokemon is better at sitting there, setting up, and tanking special hits than the Lax. And Snorlax would not be able to do that if they didn't take its 65 special stat in Generation 1 and turn it into 110 special defense. Paired with its colossal 160 HP, that is ridiculous. Borderline unkillable with a special move. Yes, its defense is relatively weak at 65, but it almost doesn't matter since it gets Curse and Rest, and with 160 HP, you can take your time. Or don't take your time and use Belly Drum. You've got enough HP to spare, and your opponent can't deal with +5 attack Snorlax. One last comment on the general mechanical change of splitting the special stat into 2. I noted earlier that this was a positive change in my view, but I would like to say it doesn't make playing Generation 1 any less fun. Yes, we have more varied and interesting Pokemon designs and balance as a result, but at the same time, using Pokemon in Generation 1 is a lot of fun, because it only has the one special stat. The shared special stat is one component of the very unique mechanics of Generation 1 that make it so much fun to play, even 30 years later. The combined special stat makes Gyarados really fun to use, because it can actually deal serious damage with water moves. If you just want to sweep the game using an Alakazam and face absolutely no resistance, this is the game for you. Anyway, I just wanted to make clear that I do really enjoy the single special stat battles of Generation 1. And that's all I had, folks. Is there a Pokemon that you enjoyed using in Generation 1 that just does not work in Generation 2 onwards? Are you also sad that Gyarados ain't what it used to be? Did I miss something notable about the data that I used here? As always, the spreadsheet and table is linked in the description. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. I've also been speedrunning a lot lately over on Twitch, so follow me there if you want to chat between videos. Thanks for watching, see you next time.